Good morning, federal employees. Again, it is so good to be with you today. Today I have a very interesting topic that I think many people will find interesting, and that is I'm going to talk about Dave Ramsey's thoughts on the TSP. So if you're not familiar, which I'm sure most of you are, Dave Ramsey is a ultra famous financial guru, radio show host who fields questions all the time from people all over the country, all over the world about financial topics. People call in, they ask questions, he answers them. Now, let me preface this whole conversation with this. And let me say that I feel for Dave Ramsey because Dave Ramsey has a hard job. His job is to give advice that is general enough to apply to basically anyone, where he has millions of listeners and viewers. And so his advice, while good, can never be that specific because it has to apply to a huge audience. Whenever he writes on his website or says stuff on his radio show, well, if he says something, he's got to stick to a script. He's got to stick to things that apply to lots of people. And so he's got a tough job, right? It's a lot easier to tailor things based on someone's situation, but he's got to stick to a specific thing that applies to as many people as possible. So, like I said, it's a hard job. And so I'm going to go over some of his thoughts and things that he has said personally about the TSP, and I'll share my thoughts to see kind of where we intersect and where we might disagree, and we'll go from there. So, the first one. Dave Ramsey says, someone asked him about investing in the TSP. And he says, okay, first things first, you want to be debt-free except for your home. And I agree and disagree at the same time. Where ideally, I think this would be awesome. Where you only have your mortgage and that's all, right? I mean, ideally you have no debt at all, right? That'd be great, your home's paid for. But in reality, how long do we want to delay saving for retirement, right? Because I think when we have lots of debts, let's say credit cards, car loans, other things outside our mortgage, I think, yes, it should be addressed, but I think sometimes, depending on how long it's going to take to address it, we may want to start investing in the TSP earlier, especially to get the match, right? I think that's a big incentive to at least invest 5% of your salary to maximize the match, and then also at the same time attack your debts. Now, when people do have debts and credit cards, and like I said, it is often an indicator of some underlying spending issues where people don't know how much they're spending, and so they overextend themselves and debt occurs, right? And so I would be wary. If you're in that situation, it's going to be okay, but you do have to make fundamental changes. If you continue as you are, then you're going to continue overspending and overextending yourselves, and you will never be able to truly get ahead and saving for retirement and all these things. So step one, yes, if you do have lots of debt outside your mortgage, make sure you address that in some way. And it doesn't always make sense to wait till those are completely gone before you start putting some into the TSP, but I would definitely address it and make sure you have a plan of attack before you get super serious about retirement planning if you can't take care of right now. So I agree and disagree with Dave. Okay, next one. Okay, so one person asked him about the TSP and if they should be using it, and he basically said, hey, if the TSP matches, which it does, we know it does, then you should use it up to the match. And outside of that, you should be investing in a Roth IRA. He's a huge fan of Roth IRAs, and I am too, frankly. But I think a couple nuances there is, of course, we know that the TSP has the Roth TSP option. So that if people want to get serious about tax-free growth down the road, they have the Roth TSP as well. So it depends what you'd prefer. Some people like an IRA, they're comfortable investing outside the TSP, and so a Roth IRA can be a great option. One downside, of course, is there is limits each year how much you could put in. It's about $6,000 this year. And it's generally lower than what you could put into the Roth TSP. And so that's one downside. So I don't really have a preference. Obviously, you should get the match from the TSP, no brainer. Above and beyond that, whether you put another $6,000 in the Roth TSP or I'm sorry, another $6,000 in the Roth IRA or in the Roth TSP, it doesn't make a huge difference. It depends what's easier for you to manage and do consistently to actually get the results that you want, right? If you have a plan and a strategy, I don't think it matters as much what tool you use as just that you understand what it is and what it's supposed to do and that you plan accordingly. Okay. So, Dave, he generally does give specific investment advice. One listener asked him about investing in the TSP, and Dave said, hey, you should go 80% C fund and 10% I fund and 10% S fund, right? 80, 10, 10, right? That's what he said. And again, I agree and disagree. I think as a general rule, many people are often too conservative. Now, it just depends. What I will warn you about is, especially as people approach retirement and are in retirement, let's say they do have that allocation, 80, 10, 10, 80% C fund, 10% I fund, and 10% S fund. What if the market goes down? Maybe let's say they have plenty of savings and they could manage it, but when the market goes down, they still need to live, they still need to do things in retirement. Guess what they're doing? They're selling, because they have to take money out, they're selling when the market is down. And so, in my opinion, a much better strategy is to have a better mix where when things are down, when things are not doing so well, especially in retirement, you have some flexibility of where you take money out. And now that with the TSP, there's limitations on which funds you could sell at a given time when you take money out. But if you do roll that money into an IRA, let's say in retirement, then you'd have flexibility. For example, I'm going to use the TSP funds as examples, but in an IRA, they'd be different. It'd be different funds, but I'm just going to use them because most federal employees are familiar with them, so I'm going to use them. For example, let's say you retire, you move your money to an IRA, and the market's up. It's awesome. Well, what are we supposed to do, right? The classical advice is buy low, sell high. And that's what I help my clients do. And it's not about timing the market. It's about, okay, when the market is low, and we know it's low, then we don't want to sell. We want cash, and we want some low-risk investments to live off of while things are low, so you don't have to sell. And then when things go up, then you sell some of your C fund and your other stock invested funds, so that what are we doing? We're buying low and selling high. And over time, that makes a big difference by having some cash, some low risk investments to make sure that your short-term needs are taken care of and you don't have to freak out. You don't have to sell when things are low. Okay. So he also suggests, like I mentioned, that he's a huge fan of IRAs, and I totally get that. And I think IRAs have huge, huge perks. And he suggests that right when you retire, you move it to an IRA. And I mentioned for some reasons, that's a great idea. But I wanted to go through some of the pros and cons because it's not you should always move it to an IRA. It's okay, what do you care about? And if you care about these things, then you probably should. It makes sense for you. So let's go over the pros and cons. So first, as I mentioned, you have more flexibility when it comes to taking money out. Now you can choose whether it comes out of the Roth TSP or the traditional TSP, but you cannot choose which funds it comes out of. So like the strategy I was just mentioning about, okay, when the market's down, you sell from the G fund or a similar fund. You can't do that in the TSP. It has to be in an IRA because you can't choose, within the TSP, you can't choose which funds you sell out of in retirement, what funds you take withdrawals out of in retirement. So that is one downside. There's not as much flexibility. Now, some of the huge pros of keeping the TSP is, first, it's simple. Many federal employees are familiar with it, and so it's simple, and they know the funds, they're familiar with how to invest it and all those things. And the TSP funds have relatively very, very low fees, right? And so overall, it's a simple and good option. Now, The IRAs have more options, and there's some great fund options there. And so you kind of have to think for you, okay, what are my goals, right? Do I want simplicity? Am I familiar with the TSP fund? Or do I want a little more flexibility and the ability to control more and that sort of thing in retirement? Because retirement is not about just, let's say, being as rich as you possibly can. While that's important, you want to be as rich as you possibly can. In my opinion, it's more about a lifestyle, right? Let's say in an IRA, you're actually able to find a fund that has slightly lower fees than the TSP funds. But what if it takes you a ton of work to manage an IRA and to do all the things that you have to do in an IRA over the TSP? Well, is that worth it, right? It depends. It depends how familiar you are with investing and how involved you want to be in that. And so it's not a clean-cut decision. It just depends on what you care about and how familiar you are with all of the elements. So those are my thoughts. And those are some of Dave Ramsey's thoughts. Look up Dave Ramsey. He's got great thoughts on getting out of debt, about paying off your mortgage, lots of things. He's got great thoughts, but just keep in mind, just like anything, there's generally not a blanket statement answer for many questions that we have. It often depends. And the best thing for you as a federal employee is to learn about all the different opinions. Because I have an opinion, right? I've shared my opinions, but it is not always the best. There's no best opinion. It's just opinions. And you want to educate yourself on a bunch of opinions and then apply that to your life. Please, even though I think my opinions are pretty good, that's why they're my opinions, right? I still know that there's things that I don't know. No one knows every detail, and so your job is to absorb, to learn, to gather all the information that you need, and then to siphon all the important aspects of everything and apply that to your life. So that's the goal, and I hope I'm helping you in that journey to get the most out of your TSP, your FERS benefits, and everything else with your federal career. So I hope that is helpful. For those that don't know, I'm a financial planner. My day job when I'm not making these videos, I help clients actually do these things for their situation, and I truly, truly enjoy it. Please check out my website at planyourfederalbenefits.com. I've got tons of great information, tons of blogs. All my videos are there as well. I have a podcast that goes over all this great information. Please, please, please learn, educate yourself so that you can, in your career, be so prepared, so ready, and when retirement comes, it is easy, it's stress-free because you know what to expect. So, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.